So I was recently watching Dr. Mike's podcast where he interviewed Dr. Amen, who, if you're not familiar with Dr. Amen, he does like SPECT scans, which from my understanding is something similar to like a functional MRI. And he uses that information to guide the treatment of his psychiatry patients. Anyway, I don't know if you've watched the podcast episode, but it quickly devolved into basically Dr. Mike exposing some of the professionally questionable practices that Dr. Amen takes part in.
Want to try and disprove your method in order to prove how strong it is?
So at this point in my career, no. I have more experience in this than anybody probably in the history of the world.
Do you not feel that it's an issue that there is no randomized control data?
It's complete crap, Mike. It's complete crap.
And I thought that Dr. Mike did a very masterful job at basically confronting someone in a calm, professional way. Even though he basically gave him a little bit of a metaphorical spanking, he did it in a way that came off basically scot-free. So today I'm going to break down the 5 techniques that Dr. Mike used that you can use in your own life to calmly confront somebody without escalating tensions. And these are actually techniques that a lot of them are from dialectical behavioral therapy. I'm not sure if Dr. Mike is familiar with them, but I'm going to break each of them down. But also I'm going to touch on one technique that I think maybe he missed and he could have done more of that you could also use if you want to keep the peace. And the fact that he didn't do this one thing makes me think maybe Dr. Mike's goal in that interaction was more to sort of call out Dr. Amen than to find mutual understanding. But, I don't know what's in his heart. So at the end of the day, I can't really say. So let me take you frame by frame through the whole dynamic and break it all down. So in the beginning, when the interview starts out, Dr. Amen is acting pretty charming. He has his typical interview voice on. And at this point, we know as the viewers who saw the preview, but Dr. Amen doesn't know that Dr. Mike is about to confront him.
And I came to realize if he helped her, which he did, it wouldn't just help her, that it would help me. It would help her children. It would help her grandchildren.
Dr. Mike was not fawning, but he was also not rude either. He, at this point, was just kind of politely, if somewhat flatly, nodding along with what Dr. Amen was saying. And I think it can be hard when you're about to confront someone to not go too far into one direction or the other. Some of us, I think, fawn too hard, which is when we kind of go into these people-pleasing tendencies and we pretend that everything's okay even when it's not. And then others become too aggressive. And then I think a lot of people sometimes do a mix of both and maybe start off one way and then go into the complete 180. That healthy middle ground is where you want to be, though, where Dr. Mike is polite, he's smiling, but he's also not glazing Dr. Amen, and he's also not coming off super aggressively. But let me show you the first time that Dr. Mike starts to express doubt about what Dr. Amen is saying, because this is kind of the first moment where we see that this is not going to be an ego-stroking conversation.
So 46 years ago, I fell in love with psychiatry. I've loved it every day since. The only medical specialty that never looks at the organ it treats. Think about that.
Is that true?
So I think what we can learn from what Dr. Mike just did is when someone says something you disagree with or something you maybe have skepticism about, don't make an accusation, just express curiosity or maybe a little bit of doubt. Ask a clarifying question. In general, I think he does a lot of this. He doesn't just go in on the offense, but he gives the other person a chance to explain themselves and make their case. And if the other person has a good case for what their argument is, then this also gives you the room to be a little humble with it, because sometimes I think we can come off a little strong and it's like, how do you mean? What do you mean by that? And it's like, oh, I meant this completely innocuous thing. And then we come off looking a little bit crazy because we completely jumped the gun. So it's always a good idea when you're dealing with a conflict to give the other person opportunity to explain themselves instead of immediately straw manning them or immediately going in on the offense. Also, in the beginning of the interview, Dr. Amen and Dr. Mike sometimes laugh together.
I scanned my mom the week before, and her brain was beautiful, and mine wasn't. And I developed a concept I call brain envy. Freud was wrong. Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problem.
This is a really good reminder to infuse humor whenever possible, even within conflicts. I think sometimes people think that when you're having a serious or heavy conversation, there's no room for levity. But levity is one of those things that makes conflict or disagreement easier to tolerate. And it makes it easier for us to, at the end of that conflict, still preserve those good relationships. Within dialectical behavioral therapy, in the interpersonal effectiveness chapter, there's a skill called Dear Man Give Fast. It's an acronym, and making sure to still throw in humor when you can is one of the components of the acronym. So laugh, infuse humor, be authentic in your reactions. You know, if you're about to confront someone and they make a joke, there's no need to just like look back at them glassy-eyed. You can laugh if it's funny, or you can crack a little joke if you think it'll diffuse tensions a little. Now let me show you the moment I think Dr. Amen realized that Dr. Mike does not agree with him and is not going to just play along for the interview.
Person, which can be
Well, there's some
problematic.
activating antidepressants. Wellbutrin is a common option.
But how would you know where to start
Well, based on symptoms and what they're
based on
experiencing.
symptoms? But what other specialty in medicine acts without imaging?
I don't know if that's a valuable question, though.
Let me also show you how Dr. Mike confronts the disadvantages of Dr. Amen's approach.
So when I think about our system and who I treat, especially in a community health center, I think about those people who can get imaging, and then the worry that it instills in them as if I'm treating them badly because they will view our podcast or they'll hear a news story about the need for imaging and that we're functioning basically as we're blind. And then those people feel like they can't get care from me or their psychiatrist. Do you worry about that outcome?
Did you notice how he was using a lot of I statements? That's another really important key of the Dear Man Give Fast acronym. When you're having a conflict with someone, instead of saying like, you did this or you made me feel that, say, I feel this, or I think this, I believe this, I wonder this, even better. Dr. Mike also asked a question to sort of gauge how Dr. Amen was metabolizing his criticism. Because when we are confronting someone, it's important to not just, blurt at them what our issue with them is, but also sort of see how it lands and see maybe the other person thinks we're being unfair or something. Now let's watch how Dr. Mike flat out confronts Dr. Amen about the conflict of interest with his supplement company.
I don't know a supplement company, so I'm a huge fan. But I'm also a huge fan of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Published a study on soldiers who had blast injuries, showed significant improvement after the first session, and then much more after the 40th session.
You mentioned you're the owner of the supplement company. How do you protect yourself from the conflict of interest that can happen in scenarios like that?
Now, this is the point where a lot of people would have just let it slide, but Dr. Mike didn't. Dr. Mike spotted maybe some hypocrisy in Dr. Amen, and he didn't just go easy on him for the interview. He thought it was important for them to address it publicly because Dr. Amen has a responsibility to his patients, to the public, because of the statements that he makes. And this is where things get really interesting. So recently I was visiting family, and one of my relatives was telling me that she remembers even as a child, like she would pick me up from school and I would ask her, when we get home, can we create a story together? And another relative told me that when she married into the family and I was around 10 years old, I was just always reading. It just got me thinking, I don't know where it comes from, but I've always had just this inborn desire to throw myself into stories, whether by creating them or consuming them. And 2 years it got to a point where this desire to dedicate myself to fiction was just unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd taken a wrong turn by not fully dedicating myself to that. So I completely pivoted. I shut down my private practice to focus fully on writing and YouTube. And to be honest, I think I often forget just how anxious I used to be before that was the case. I remember I used to be trying to watch TV with my husband, and I would be picking at a pimple on my scalp, and then I would become convinced that it would get infected and somehow spread to my brain, and then it would just completely derail and ruin my entire evening. When I look back on that time now, it's just so shocking to me because it's I can't even remember what it was like to be in that headspace or how I could possibly think that. And if you're currently feeling the way that I used to feel, I just want you to know that it's never too late to shift careers, or to finally go for what you feel you've always wanted. And one way that you can do that is to go back to school, which is why I'm really excited to introduce today's sponsor, Southern New Hampshire University. SNHU is one of the largest online accredited universities in the US, with some of the most affordable tuition rates in the nation. It was even voted one of the country's most innovative universities by US News and World Report. They have associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees in a wide range of fields such as finance, business, computer science, education, psychology, nursing, and so on. You can gain real-world experience with flexible programs. There are no set class times, so you can study when and how you want, whether you're also working, taking care of a family, or you have extenuating circumstances. Plus, if you want to get your degree faster and cheaper, you can transfer in up to 90 academic, military, or experiential credits that you accrued somewhere else. It's never too late to pursue something you love, so go to the link below to explore over 200 programs. Thank you so much to SNHU. So Dr. Mike was pointing out Dr. Amon's hypocrisy, and at this point, we can see what I perceive as Dr. Amon kind of panicking.
Yeah, you mentioned there are some reasons to be critical of pharma. What are those?
Well, I think that they market them nonstop. And so they almost creating the market for it.
How is that different than your supplement line?
That's a good question.
Kind of buying himself time when he says, that's a good question. Deeper in the interview, Dr. Mike starts asking more rapid-fire questions at Dr. Amon.
So I'm always trying to figure out what's a safe recommendation that I can give universally to my patients. I'm curious, we never kind of settled on our question about the compliance issue. That you mentioned that getting these imaging tests is valuable for compliance. And I was talking about how it could potentially scare people away from seeking healthcare, from a mental health care specifically, from a provider who doesn't do imaging. Do you have any fear that you might be discouraging patients from getting good quality medical care or mental health care just because they're not doing imaging?
Kind of masking the fact that he's making an argument. You know, he's not framing it as, I think you're wrong for doing it this. He's framing it more as a question like, hey, do you think maybe this could be a disadvantage of what you're doing? He's framing it in a way that's curious and conversational and personal, still trying to figure out, how the other person feels about the argument, still treating it like a two-person conversation instead of just like one person, again, kind of spewing all this judgment at the second person. Let me give you a concrete example.
If you were to interview Kim and hear all these struggles that she's having taking the bar, issues with impulse control, would you have been able to come to that same diagnosis without the imaging?
Well, I would have been able to guess at it, but I wouldn't be able to know.
Well, there's a difference between guessing and asking validated questionnaires.
Here, instead of Dr. Mike saying, it seems like you would have been able to come to that conclusion through self-report with imaging, he instead poses it as a question. If you were to interview her and hear yada yada yada, would you have been able to come to the same conclusion without imaging? Again, this leaves room for him to be wrong, because if Dr. Amon has a really good response and he says, no, actually, that wouldn't be the case and let me explain to you why, then Dr. Mike can say, oh, okay, I see, maybe I was wrong in my judgments, but I gave the other person an opportunity to explain to me why. It gives the other person a chance to rebut you. Ironically, when you say something very categorically and you make like this wild accusation at people, it sets you up to look really bad if somebody points out that actually your accusation was pretty wild. If somebody actually points out that you were completely in the wrong. Whereas if you lead with a question and with curiosity and like, hey, did you realize this? Or like, what do you think about this? Or have you thought about this possible con? It facilitates mutual understanding and it gets closer to the truth that you should ultimately both care about, right? Like your priority in the situation shouldn't likely be, let me slam dunk this person, let me expose this person, but rather, let me see where the truth lies, because this person might have input that I have no idea about. And if I just make an accusation and it turns out to be false, or, I judge something about their methods and it turns out that I was wrong, then that's actually going to look really bad for me. Later in the interview, we see Dr. Mike confronting Dr. Amon with the fact that a professional organization disagrees with him. But again, he does it very tactfully.
Why don't, if we're flying blind, why don't we include this imaging? Why doesn't every family medicine doctor Why does the American Psychiatric Association, American Academy of Neurology, why are they against this imaging?
Well, not everybody's against imaging. That's
Well, the
really
examples that
important.
I gave.
It isn't until an hour and 4 minutes into the interview that Dr. Amen seems to realize they're even arguing, because it's at that point that he says to Dr. Mike, "I have more experience in this than probably anyone in the history of the world."
It's like me saying something fully against the American Academy of Family Physicians without evidence to say why I'm disagreeing with them.
Well, I have 90 studies that I have published, and I have the world's largest database. And I actually don't know what the point of us arguing about it is. I have more experience in this than anybody probably in the history of the world. And if you don't look, you don't know.
And this is what happens when you confront someone without couching it in a question or in curiosity, and the other person's ego gets bruised. That was, from what I noticed, the first time that Dr. Mike had flat out confronted Dr. Amen without sort of cushioning it in curiosity. It didn't land so well. Imagine if they had started that way at minute 4 rather than an hour in minute 4 of the interview. It could have gone downhill really quickly. He might have never gotten to this conversation, might have never had a chance to really confront Dr. Amen on his behavior. But just a minute later, Dr. Mike realizes that tensions have escalated and he tries to bring the temperature down a little.
Is there randomized controlled data on SPECT scans and their efficacy in a specific mental health condition?
Yes.
Which one?
Well, which one do you want to talk about?
Anyone.
I mean, if you go on PubMed.gov
Well, can you name one right now?
today.
You're the leading expert, so I'm a family medicine
like
doctor. I don't know. So.
distinguishing.
He humbles himself, but this technique also has a subtle second effect, which is to push the burden of proof back on Dr. Amen, to challenge him to bring up just one disorder for which there are randomized controlled trials showing the benefits of using SPECT imaging. When Dr. Amen isn't capable of providing that evidence, Dr. Mike then points out he's not actually listing RCTs.
One of the most important things to do is distinguishing post-traumatic stress disorder from traumatic brain injury. And because they often present with similar symptoms, but the treatments are actually opposed to each other. PTSD, generally, you want to calm the brain down. Traumatic brain injury, you have to repair and stimulate it. I published 2 studies on 21,000 people showing we can separate these groups with high levels of accuracy. In 2016, Discover magazine listed our research as one of the top 100 stories in science. We could also talk about Alzheimer's disease.
But that's not a randomized
autopsies.
controlled study.
I'm sorry?
That's not a randomized controlled study.
We're talking imaging.
Yeah.
This is not a pharmaceutical intervention where we're going to do
Well, the goal of doing the
randomized-
imaging is to create more customizable treatments, as you said. And if you have customizable treatments, your outcomes should be better. That's the randomized controlled study.
And our outcomes are better. We published a study
But that's
on
not the question
500
I'm
outcomes.
asking. Randomized controlled data is really important. Wouldn't you say to develop a causal relationship?
I'm sorry. Say this again.
Randomized controlled trials are
Are
very
good for
important to creation
medications.
causal interventions. To say that this isn't just a correlation, this is a causative pathway. You need the randomized controlled data to remove outliers, to create a generalized group, to have them double blinded, to not know which one's getting intervention, which one's not.
And we really see Dr. Amen starting to panic because he, in fact, does not seem to have the RCT evidence that Dr. Mike is asking for. And then again, Dr. Mike starts diffusing tensions by explaining, listen, we have a shared goal here. He thinks what Dr. Amen is doing is great, and he wants to generalize it to the whole population. He's not trying to point out that Dr. Amen's approach isn't evidence-based. They're on the same team here.
Because it's great that you're helping people. And I am so for that you're helping people. And I want more of that. Now I'm trying to think as a family medicine doctor, how can we generalize what you're doing so that I can do it too? But in order for me to do it, I need to know it works from a randomized controlled study. Why don't we have that?
This is very important in conflict, is reminding the other person that you're on the same team, you have a shared goal. if things are getting heated, like if you and your partner are really in the throes of a disagreement, just reminding them like, hey, we want the same thing here. We both want for us to be connected, for us to not be fighting, for us to facilitate communication. Like we both have the same goal in this relationship. So let's not treat each other like enemies. So Dr. Amen responds by asking Dr. Mike to design the RCT because he just cannot compute what he means by that. And Dr. Mike again flips the burden of proof back on him.
So design it for me. Because you're going to randomize, you got imaging, you didn't. So automatically it's not blinded.
Well, you
right?
can get sham imaging.
Okay.
You've been doing this since 1991. So I'm trying to look at you as the expert. Like, do you not feel that it's an issue that there is no randomized control data? Like you're asking me to design the trial right now.
Watch the way that Dr. Mike points out the weaknesses of Dr. Amen's research.
We have data that goes, you get better and you don't. So what's the difference in depression of people who got better and those who didn't?
Where are you sourcing those patients from?
Well, from our clinics.
So all your patients are getting the spec. You're not separating them to groups of here we're treating patients who didn't get spec.
Well,
versus
no, not everybody gets scanned at our clinics.
But for
We
the
see
research, you're pointing out like you have this study that shows 84% of your patients improved. But we're not comparing them against a group of people who didn't get spec.
Unfortunately, Dr. Amen's response seems to be a little bit defensive, and Mike points out that his statement isn't based on evidence.
No, but nobody that I know of has outcomes like that.
But do you think that's enough for me to start doing spec in my clinic?
I think if you started doing SPECT in your clinic, it would revolutionize your practice.
And you're saying that as someone who's passionate about it, or that there's proof of that?
No, I'm saying it as someone who has taught people around the world to do imaging.
Now, Dr. Mike does something interesting, which is he says, I don't want this to feel like a gotcha.
But you're still advocating, at least what I'm hearing, is you're still advocating for not looking before you go about changing.
Because I don't want this to feel like a gotcha. Because what I'm trying to do is...
It doesn't feel like a gotcha. It feels like a good conversation.
I really want to learn from what you're doing because I want to be a better doctor, genuinely. Like my goal, why I still practice medicine, is because I want to deliver the best care for my patients. And if what you're doing is great, we need to get that message out there to the world as fast as possible because otherwise people are suffering.
And again, reiterating that they have the same shared goal in the conversation. It wasn't clear to me whether Dr. Amen bought this or not, but I noticed that every time Dr. Mike said it, it did diffuse tensions a little bit. However, just a couple minutes later, Dr. Amen started to get very irritated, and he flat out told Dr. Mike that he was twisting his words.
Because to continue to fly blind is not anybody's interest.
So for my patients who have such bad major depressive disorder that they can't groom themselves, they have trouble taking a shower, the solution is asking them if what they're doing is good or bad for their brain. You think that's enough motivation to help this individual?
No, it's all of it. See, now I feel like you're twisting my
I'm trying to
words to
understand.
create conflict.
Please tell me how do
It's
I
like
understand
if somebody...
A few more minutes later, Dr. Amen tells Dr. Mike, that's complete crap.
Because how do you know why they're that way?
Well, the issue that I believe...
No, answer the question. How do you know what is actually going on in that person's brain without looking?
By asking them questions, by doing
That's
validated
complete crap,
questioning.
Mike. It's complete crap that you know what's going on in that person's brain. You're guessing.
At this point, he's very heated. It's a very different composure from his calm, compassionate, soft-spoken charm up until then. Now, Dr. Mike again reminds Dr. Amen of their shared goal.
And I think imaging holds such a key here, which is why I'm trying to figure out how to get it to the masses on a level that is scalable. So I'm trying to figure out how we get there. How do we get SPECT across the APA, the AAN? How do we get everyone
Well, I
on board?
think
A minute later, Dr. Mike also tries to elicit perspective taking from Dr. Amen. He tries to get Dr. Amen to empathize with him by doing this.
If a pharmaceutical company came out and said, we have this medication, it works, we never tested it against any other placebo, no randomized controlled data, but everyone who takes it loves it, would you buy into that pharmaceutical? Or would you say, I need to see the data?
you always have to see the data.
But
which
where is the data
why-
with spec scans?
This is a technique that you should absolutely be using in your relationships, especially in conflict, when you feel like somebody is just like not really understanding your perspective. Try to get them to wonder how they would feel in your shoes. You know, if they just came back from work and they started yelling at you because they had a really rough day and they're just like not listening and they're not empathizing with what you're saying, say, look, I understand you had a rough day, your boss was terrible to you. Can you put yourself in my shoes for a second? How would you feel if I came home from work and I started yelling at you immediately? Or even sometimes you can ask them to paraphrase what you're saying. You can be like, hey, I feel like I'm not certain you're understanding what I'm saying. So would you mind just like summarizing what you think I'm saying and I can see if we're missing each other somewhere? Next in the interview, Dr. Amen does a bit of a straw man with Dr. Mike's argument. He's saying, so you're arguing that we should just continue to fly blind.
So you're arguing we should just continue to fly blind.
No, I argue, but see, do you think I am advocating for flying blind? Can I tell you what I'm advocating for? Then you tell me if you agree with my notion.
Dr. Mike clarifies that that is not his point, and he asks for permission from Dr. Amen to make his point so that he can see if Dr. Amen agrees with it. This is, again, really skillfully done. When someone strawmans your argument or, twists your words, instead of saying, like, you're twisting my words, you're being so disingenuous, a much better way to respond to that is to say, oh, no, not at all. That's not what I'm saying. Do you mind if I try to explain what I am actually saying so that you can see if we agree on that? Because, like, who at that point is going to be like, no, I don't want to hear what you actually have to say. I want to continue to twist your words, right? They're most likely going to give you permission to make your point. And at that point, you can correct the straw man. You can say, I'm not saying this, which you're saying I said. I'm actually saying this, which is much more reasonable. Do you think we can meet halfway on this? Again, treating it as like a shared goal. A couple of minutes later, I can't tell if this is a jab, but this happened.
The outcomes based on the treatments being more customizable in the spec category. And then if we see this drastic improvement, everyone changes their mind. AAN, APA's recommending it. We're all getting it done.
Yeah, see, that would be great if that happened.
You don't want to make a push for that on this podcast?
I'm not sure this podcast is going to get us to where we need to go.
Why not?
That would surprise me.
And again, when Dr. Mike responds, he brings it back to that shared goal. He says, I'm on your side.
When we think about people who are critics of spec, I want to prove them wrong, right? Because I want to help people and I'm on your side and I want to figure out how to get this done correctly.
But at this point, it's no longer working. Dr. Amen seems aggravated. And listen, sometimes that's unavoidable in confrontation. Sometimes you can try to diffuse tensions as much as you can, but the other person, depending on their personality or their circumstances, is still going to get upset. So then Dr. Mike goes into explaining the scientific method to Dr. Amen. And by doing so, he's kind of subtly pointing out Dr. Amen's bias. And he asks him if he agrees with the scientific method.
If we're trying to do scientific research, it shouldn't be done in a way where Secretary Kennedy said, we're going to prove that this causes this. Scientific research starts with asking a hypothetical, asking a question, creating a hypothesis, disproving yourself, proving the null hypothesis, not just agreeing with yourself or seeking to agree with yourself. Do you agree with that?
Now, shortly after that, Dr. Amen responds in a very strange way that to me, again, feels like it's coming from a place of ego. You probably don't know this. The APA named me a thought leader.
You didn't bring this up, and you don't know. The American Psychiatric Association last year named me a thought leader. But
I'm not attacking you here. I'm not anti your work. I'm trying to figure out how to get your work to more people. We're on the same team, helping patients.
which is kind of like the sophisticated way of saying, don't you know who I am? It's an appeal to authority fallacy when somebody who doesn't have an argument just kind of falls back on but the argument is the fact that I have status, the fact that I have authority, that should be enough argument for you. And Mike responds by pointing out he's not attacking his character, right? So when you see that somebody has become very defensive and their ego is up and they're like, don't you know who I am? The correct way to respond in those situations is to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to attack your character at all. I thought we were talking about this specific thing. And shortly after that, Dr. Amen says, are we going to talk about the book at all?
No, but your patients will be better if you added imaging.
But you can't
are
say
we
that.
going to talk about the book at all? Or
Well, I mean, this is a premise of your book, no?
imaging is not the premise of my book.
Is not in your book?
It's in the book, but it's not
There's
the premise
images
of
of SPECT in the book.
We're not going to talk about the book.
Which, on one hand, it's you go on these interviews when you have a new book coming out and you're fully expecting to market that new product, right? In case you haven't noticed, 99% of the interviews that you watch on these types of podcasts are set up because interviewees are selling something, usually a new book, and they're trying to market it to the audience. Nothing wrong with that, but just something to keep in mind. So on one hand, he's, trying to bring it back to what his goal was in this interaction. On the other hand, it's also kind of serving the function of changing the subject. At this point, it kind of feels like, hey, we've been going on in circles on this topic for some time. Can we talk about something else? But it definitely shows how much Dr. Amen was probably not expecting this conversation. It's like when you're going to a conversation with someone and they are fully expecting for you to people please them and fully expecting for you to not call them out. And they are very sorely mistaken when you, in fact, do decide to confront a behavior that you have an issue with. In the last half hour of this interview, Dr. Amen seems visibly upset, and Dr. Mike asks him, do you think I'm being unfair? If so, please tell me.
What do you mean? We talked about pain. We talked about the cycle of pain, how your brain has this blueprint that it starts cycling between that we're on board with. We talked about Dr. Sarno's work. Do you feel like I'm being unfair? If you think so, please tell me.
Yes.
How so?
Because you're going on the same thing over and over again.
This is really important because what this does is it asks for emotional feedback from the other person. It gives the other person space to air out their grievances. And it also diffuses tensions again because the other person realizes, hey, this person isn't here to slam dunk me. This person is here to hear out what I have to say, and they might not like what I have to say, but they're not going to be unfair to me. And if I tell them that they're being unfair to me, they're going to try to tone it down. That's really important in a relationship. Shortly afterwards, Dr. Amen is lamenting that people don't ask for his wisdom instead of criticizing the weaknesses of his methodologies. And Dr. Mike clarifies, are you saying that I did that?
It's interesting to me. Often I've been criticized, and very few people go, so you've seen more scans than anyone in the history of the world. What have you learned? And as opposed to, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you should have done this. And don't you think it'd be better if you did that? As opposed to, so what did you learn from nearly 300,000 scans?
Are you saying I said that?
No, that it just doesn't feel like it.
This is a really good way to react when you think that somebody might be accusing you of something, but they go about it in an indirect way, maybe a passive-aggressive way. They're not flat out saying hey, you did this thing. It's a really good thing at that point to stop, pause, and be like, are you saying this? Let me just clarify. Are you saying that I was criticizing you, or are you saying that you felt blah, blah, blah by what I did? Instead of strawmanning that person, it gives them the opportunity to make their case and to say what they really mean. And if they have an issue with you, to bring it out into the open rather than taking passive-aggressive jabs. Now, towards the end, Dr. Mike kind of builds up his whole thesis, his whole issue with Dr. Amen, which is he doesn't like how Dr. Amen sort of shames mainstream psychiatry without evidence to back up his methods, right? Like he's framing the way he does things as the right way to do things and completely devaluing the whole field of psychiatry and the whole body of research backing it up.
My only concern with using the imaging as the compliance benefit is that if you were just using it in that way, I see the benefit. But then when you're criticizing the rest of the psychiatric community, it's almost impacting our ability to practice medicine because we're not doing the imaging. Do you see what I'm saying with that?
Yeah, but I can't not say what I believe the truth is, because then the field will never change.
But why
and
can't
if
you
the
just say
field
the
never
tool
changes,
is beneficial?
I'm sorry?
Why can't you just say, this is beneficial, this is how I motivate my patients? But when you say we're flying blind, you're creating this distinction for patients that are saying, if we don't see Dr. Amen and we see Dr. Mike, we're going to get subpar blind care. Why would we ever do that? Why would anyone want to go see a doctor that's flying blind?
It's a good question.
But do you see how it sets up the dichotomy for patients where they have to make this terrible decision and they're already not in a good mental health space? So I'm curious, can we use it as a compliance booster, but not necessarily shame the rest of psychiatry? And instead,
So how do we move forward if we don't
Research.
say that what we're doing is flawed?
we need to, well, first of all, you could say what we're doing is flawed, but I think it's not fair to say you have the solution until we have the randomized controlled data.
I did think at this point they were both kind of going around in circles and not acknowledging the other person's point. I thought that Dr. Mike, for instance, could have conceded that Dr. Amen does have a lot of research on SPECT scans. They're just not highest on the hierarchy of evidence. And similarly, Dr. Amen doesn't concede that he's missing stronger evidence for his claims. I feel like both of them could have made concessions to the other and sort of seen where the other person was coming from and been like, okay, like, I agree with you that you have this. I just think you're missing this piece. And if you're in a conflict where you basically want to win, you want to expose the other person, you want to make them look bad, then I guess you don't need to, make concessions towards the other person. But I would say in like most human to human interactions, it's usually a good idea to try to preserve the relationship if you can and to try to see the seed of truth in what the other person is saying as well. So next, Dr. Mike asks Dr. Amen if he would ever give up SPECT scans if the research were to disprove them. And Dr. Amen disappointingly says that after 35 years of using them, absolutely not.
I think it's an important question to ask. If we do that randomized controlled study that we've just talked about, and it turns out that it's not useful, would you give it up?
Absolutely not.
Why?
I thought this next clip was interesting because here we hear him already working on trying to disprove a study that doesn't even exist. The confirmation bias is so strong that he's literally already forming a counter-argument to a piece of evidence that hasn't been presented to him. It's just a very clear-cut sign when somebody already has their mind made up and nothing's going to change it.
But one statistician told me that 16 out of 17 statistics lie.
Towards the very end, Dr. Mike confronts Dr. Amen on why he doesn't think his own data is flawed, only everybody else's. And Dr. Amen doesn't really have a response, he just angrily drinks water.
You said like 16 out of 17 research articles are flawed. Does that apply to your research?
No, 16 out of 17 statistics lie.
Oh,
So
is that
you
true
can-
about your research as well?
No,
Why?
because we want it to be reproducible.
But the rest of the scientific community doesn't? I'm just asking why your assumption is that this randomized controlled study would be flawed, but yours aren't.
You said I didn't have any randomized controlled trials.
I didn't say your randomized controlled trial. I said your trials. I just don't know why there's such a negative push to the scientific field. Like we're now discounting data because you're saying data is always flawed. But you use data.
So you don't believe that? Really?
A couple minutes later, Dr. Mike flat out confronts Dr. Amon's confirmation bias. And Dr. Amon flat out admits that he's no longer interested in disproving his theory. He's no longer interested in the scientific method.
So there are criticisms of the research, and there's always criticisms of the research.
Always.
But my concern is that when you're ready to write off the research that disagrees with you, you're part of the problem that you just said, that if you're just seeking to agree with yourself, that how the scientific community says that you just said they do that. They try and get research that agrees with them. Don't you want to try and disprove your method in order to prove how strong it is?
So at this point in my career, no.
And this is what happens when you have just too much of your own identity invested into a theory. Theories should not become part of your identity. And this is hard because when you're a researcher, for instance, you have usually a very small niche. And that theory that you're operating from becomes everything that you know about the world, everything that you know the most about. And if there were to come this tsunami of information being actually everything that you know has just been disproven wrong, you in that situation are going to feel like my whole life's work, my whole life mission, everything that I knew to be true has just been inundated. Most people at that point are going to feel like there's just too much to lose. They can't handle what it means about their identity, their ego, their whole life purpose. So most people at that point are just going to do mental gymnastics to try to justify why actually that whole tsunami of evidence was not real.
But I am telling you right now, that motherfucker back there is not real.
So in addition to learning a lot about conflict and communication in this interview, I think we also saw a really ugly display of something I think all humans struggle with, which is confirmation bias. And what happens when a scientist is no longer interested in following the scientific method, in ultimately disproving their theories in order to get closer to the truth. So what are the 5 techniques that Dr. Mike used in this interview? Number 1, couch criticism in questions. Lead with curiosity. So let's say that you're talking to your roommate, Jenna, who didn't take out the trash and she hasn't been doing her chores for a long time. You could say, "Hey, Jenna, I noticed you didn't take out the trash yesterday. Did something come up or you're not able to see the chore calendar where it is currently? I'm just trying to think of ways to troubleshoot this." Instead of just going straight in, "You didn't take out the trash, you blah, 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 blah." Just lead with curiosity, lead with openness, because you never know. Jenna might say, "Actually, my grandpa died last night," and then you're going to look like a total asshole. Or what about if you're talking to your boyfriend who has been yelling at you a lot and he says something really awful to you? Even in a situation like that, obviously, I'm not advocating for you to walk on eggshells around abusers, but let's say this person's just had a really bad week and they've just been saying some terrible things, but they're not usually like that. You could say, "I'm wondering why you chose to say that. What's going on for you right now? Did I do something to upset you?" Because sometimes, you never know. Maybe that person is harboring resentment over something you said 5 minutes ago, or maybe they're going through something awful, or maybe they're just an asshole. But if they're just an asshole, they're not going to have a good response to your curiosity, and then you can move forward from there. And then you'll know that at least you tried. You gave them the space to air out their grievances, and if there wasn't actually something substantial there, you are completely within your right to continue confronting that person. So that's number 1, couch criticism in questions and lead with curiosity. Number 2, frame your goal in the conversation as mutual. So you and your roommate Jenna have the mutual goal of fairness in the chore distribution as roommates and of keeping the apartment clean. That should be mutual goal that you share. You and your boyfriend have the shared goal of staying connected, which includes not hurting each other's feelings, communicating more effectively when one person's upset, so that ultimately you guys don't break up, right? Usually when people are in a relationship, that's their mutual goal. Let's hope we don't break up. Now, of course, if he continues to speak to you disrespectfully, then that shared goal becomes in jeopardy. And at that point, you two have separate goals. Your goal is, I'm not going to be mistreated. His goal is, I'm going to keep mistreating you. But even if that's the case, it behooves you to frame it to that person as if you still have a shared goal. So number 2, frame the goal as mutual. Number 3, balance levity with authenticity. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where you want to be neither fawning nor leading with aggression. So with your roommate, you're not saying, oh no, it's fine about the trash, don't worry, I'm not upset about it at all. And you're also not saying you once again didn't take out the trash. You can be curious, don't pretend to be fine if you're not, but don't let your anger get the best of you either. Try to throw in some rapport building, like asking how her date went last night. This could be either before or after the conversation hit that rough patch, like if you had a rupture in the conversation, then try to repair it, try to get back to strengthening the relationship. With your boyfriend too, it's neither walking on eggshells around him, nor responding with just as much, if not more, aggression. In romantic relationships, usually a really good way to infuse levity and just remind the other person of your goodwill is physical touch. I don't know if you've noticed this, but with a lot of people, not all, some people get overstimulated, but a lot of people really like when their partner, for instance, just like holds their hand during conflict or puts a hand on their back just to remind them like, hey, I care about you, I love you, I'm here for you. This is a tough moment, but at the end of the day, like, we are a team. Number 4, shift the responsibility back on them while humbling yourself. So with Jenna, ask her to explain what happened with the trash without getting self-righteous. Say like, listen, I'm new to this whole roommate thing, so please let me know if I'm missing something. Like, how did you do things with your previous roommate or with your boyfriend? Call out the bad behavior while staying humble about it. You could say like, listen, I know I sometimes say the wrong thing when I'm angry. I sometimes put my foot in my mouth. I'm just trying to understand if you know how hurtfully that landed for me. And number 5, try to elicit perspective taking. Ask the other person to imagine they're in your situation, or ask them to summarize what you're saying so that you really know that it's like getting through to them what you're trying to say. Like with Jenna, you could say, listen, overflowing trash is just a personal pet peeve of mine. It's kind of like how you can't stand when the dishes are done, Or with your boyfriend, you might ask, how would you feel if out of the blue I said to you what you just said to me? When people are heated, they sometimes forget to have empathy for the other person. So it's really important to just like prompt the other person to take your perspective. Everybody in moments of conflict experiences this dip where it's like, my perspective is correct. I'm not going to listen to the other person past a certain point if I'm heated enough. So if you can get the other person to remember, oh, right, like I also need to empathize with the other person. If they have the capacity for it, it's usually a good idea. Now, the one thing that I think Dr. Mike could have done better was, again, conceded when Dr. Amen had a point, and if they just didn't agree, just stopped beating a dead horse. And this really comes down to, what is your goal in the situation? Dialectical behavioral therapy talks about this, how like when you're going into a conflict or any sort of communication with a person, you have to keep in mind what your goal is. Sometimes your goal might be to get something you want, like I want to get a promotion from my boss. Sometimes it might be to preserve self-respect, like again, I want to get a promotion from my boss. And sometimes it might also be, I want to preserve the relationship with the other person. Oftentimes it's all 3, oftentimes it's 2 of them, and rarely it's just one of them. I would say in like 90% of situations, most people would like to also preserve the relationship with the other person. But if you don't, if that's not a goal for you, that has a completely different route where, I guess like if that's the case, you don't need to make concessions. You don't need to genuinely care about what the other person's saying. Versus if you do want to preserve the relationship, make a concession when the other person has a point. So like with your roommate Jenna, you can say, I get it. You were on a date last night and you forgot because you came home late and it was dark and you didn't see the chore chart. Next time, please try to remember, should I put the chore chart closer to the trash bin? Would that be helpful? You're getting your point across, you're preserving self-respect, but you're also trying to preserve the relationship. Or with your boyfriend, you can say, I agree, I shouldn't have done whatever it was that pissed him off 5 minutes ago. I won't do that anymore in the future. I'm sorry that I said that and that it hurt your feelings. I'd really appreciate it if you also please don't say whatever he said to you in response. Maybe we can have a code word when we're getting heated. So the formula here is concession plus reinforce your request plus propose a future-focused solution. So you're saying like, listen, like you have a point about this, even if it's like a tiny thing. It could be like the tiniest concession. You say, okay, you have a point about this. Yeah, like your non-RCT studies are very high quality. Yeah. Reinforce your request, Here's what my request is for you. And then here's a solution I propose for how we can get to that request. And if they don't agree with the solution, then you can troubleshoot it together. This pretty closely maps out with the DEAR portion of the Dear Man Give Fast acronym that I was talking about. It's slightly different, but it's a similar concept. Otherwise, if you're just looking to win and you don't care about preserving the relationship with the other person, I suppose that you can never concede when that person has a point. But quite frankly, I'm not sure that that will be very enjoyable for you or that you will have much success with it. But if you're in a debate team or in court, I don't know, I feel like still in those situations, it still behooves you to point it out when the other person has a point, because the audiences, the people watching are going to see that and be like, oh, okay, they're intellectually humble, so they're easier to reason with. I don't know. That's what I thought Dr. Mike could have done a little bit better. What both of them could have done a little bit better is just kind of acknowledged where the other person was coming from. But aside from that, like I said, the 5 techniques he used in this interview that I would highly recommend when you're dealing with conflict: couch criticism and questions, frame your goal as mutual, balance levity with authenticity, shift the responsibility back on them while humbling yourself, and try to elicit perspective taking. Did you watch this podcast interview? If you did, I really want to hear your thoughts down below, and see you soon.